Now in today's video, we're going to be talking about a brand new Supreme Court decision that just came down. It is going to have far-reaching implications as it relates to the Second Amendment, not only on federal statutes, but also on state statutes as well. It is going to provide controlling authority that is going to end up severely limiting what the ATF can do, along with state regulatory agencies as well. Now, the case is called Sackett versus the EPA. In the underlying case, the Sacketts owned property. They wanted to build a fairly modest home on the property, and as a result, they decided to move some earth around, all right? Nothing particularly egregious. However, the Environmental Protection Agency said, oh, wait a minute, your earth-moving endeavors actually create an issue as it relates to the waters of the United States. Now, apparently, the Sacketts' property that they owned, even though it wasn't directly adjacent to a navigable water source, it was close enough as far as the EPA was considered that this affected or at least gave them jurisdiction to potentially levy a tremendous amount of fines on the Sacketts, along with potentially even throwing them in jail. They consistently lost at the trial and appellate court levels, but ultimately made their way to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court issued a unanimous decision. A little bit of a caveat. Not all justices joined in the opinion that was delivered by Justice Alito, but there were several concurring opinions that all of the justices cross-concurred with. So they're all kind of on the same page here. But one of the things that the justices said was, look, the Congress is the ones who need to regulate this behavior. There's a famous quote that Justice Alito used in his opinion, where he said that the Congress does not hide elephants in mouse holes. Essentially, they don't sit there and say, well, we're not going to tackle this massive problem by simply ignoring it and allowing a regulatory agency to go ahead and do what we couldn't do at the legislative level. Now, this video is being sponsored by USCCA, and they're doing a giveaway right now. You can find out all the details in the description directly below this video. You're absolutely going to want to participate. It does end soon, and what they're giving away is unbelievably cool. I'll give you a hint. It can fit in your holster. So they overturn this and they severely restrict what the EPA can do. Now, you might have heard me talk about the Chevron defense. This is something that we are going to get a ruling on fairly soon. One of the reasons why we have such an expansive federal regulatory bodies like the ATF and the EPA and groups like that is because of a case called Chevron. In Chevron, the Supreme Court had originally said that if Congress doesn't specifically state something, then regulatory agencies like the ATF can go ahead and create their own rules, and those rules essentially have the force of law. This has essentially allowed Congress a pass. They don't need to actually engage in the legislative process. Remember that every single law is a restriction on our freedoms. By having laws become generated in a legislative body, those individual representatives have to put their political necks on the line every time they want to enact a law. As a result of that, the theory is that legislators are going to be very hesitant to restrict our freedoms. When they abdicate that responsibility and place it on a federal regulatory agency, that regulatory agency is not subject to, an election. So these individuals can essentially make laws, potentially even impose criminal penalties without having the political legislative process attached to that. The court, we've seen, is very antagonistic to this idea. It appears as though they realized they made a mistake originally with Chevron. And this case, EPA, is a massive signaling device that they are on the brink of getting ready to overturn Chevron. This, like I said, is important not just because of federal laws as it relates to our ability to keep and bear arms, but now also state laws. And this is where things get a little interesting, and we have to kind of follow the flow chart. So when you have a state, regulatory body that says you cannot do X, that is presumptively going to be lawful if X is not a constitutionally protected civil right. Now, as all of you guys know, because of both Heller, McDonald, and Bruen especially, the Second Amendment is seen as being a specifically enumerated constitutional right, and it applies to the individual. This is not subject to some level of debate. I mean, this is settled law at this point. The Second Amendment applies to individuals, and specific to New York Rifle and Pistol Association v. Bruen, we now know that the Second Amendment absolutely exists outside the home. So if the regulatory agency that we're talking about is a state regulatory agency, they could claim that, hey, listen, there's no congressional, legislation that specifically prescribes us, screwing around with conduct as it relates to this. We can go ahead and do it and create a presumptively lawful form of regulation. This appears as though it will be overturned. If you have essentially a mandate now from the court that all forms of regulations need to come from a legislative body, that they cannot come from simply a regulatory body that's housed in the executive branch of government, that is going to significantly curtail what states can do as it relates to your constitutional rights. So while this case, as I said, doesn't go squarely for the Second Amendment, it's really going to be used as controlling authority as we move forward, challenging some of these state regulations. Now, I know that this video is kind of a little wonky and, doesn't get into things like pistol braces and, whether or not you can have a suppressor or things like that. But you need to understand that this is the underlying groundwork that will help eliminate all of those noxious, what I would consider to be completely unconstitutional laws. Anyways, as always, if you want to reach out to me, definitely do so on my email at steven@artemishq.com. And as always, train constantly, train consistently, train repetitively, and train with purpose. Above all else, stay safe.
Before you go, you just missed one of our best videos that got over 500,000 views. Click right here to watch it now.